Hey YouTube, today in the shop I've got a 2001 all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive Ford Escape. This one's got the 3.0 V6. As you can see here, I've got a bunch of other things going on here, several different jobs. But the job for this video is to install a block heater in preparation for this vehicle going up to mainland Alaska, where winter temperatures regularly hit 40 below. And that's just straight up temperature, no wind chill or anything, because wind chill doesn't really affect equipment. It's just anything live like pets or yourself or whatever. Anyway, block heater is being installed, so we'll just show you how to do that. First step is to drain the cooling system. Okay, so to drain the radiator of the antifreeze, we're gonna have to remove this splash shield here. It's held in by a few 10mm bolts. One's right here, one's on the in the fender well here, and there's another one here and another one here. So we'll go ahead and remove all of those so that we can get this out of the way and access the Radiator Petcock, which is right about here. So we are at the passenger side front wheel facing towards the back. Here is the 10mm bolt that's behind the wheel and in the wheel well. So we'll go ahead and remove this one. All right. Right there. So that should be all the regular bolts to get this splash pan out of the way enough to expose the Radiator Petcock. So this guy right here is the Radiator Petcock. To get the fluid or antifreeze to drain from the radiator, you'll need to get a 19mm socket or a wrench. Something else I like to do is I like to jam a hose on the end of this so that I can get it to a proper drain receptacle. So this hose here is just a PVC hose. It's 5/16 inside diameter, and as you can see there, it slides very nicely onto the petcock here. So we'll loosen the valve here, which sometimes are just hand tight, and in this case it's a little tighter than hand tight, so I'll go ahead and grab a wrench. As you can see, this one was not very tight. So what I'll do here is I will grab a drain pan, and I'll give you a different view. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to end up turning this counterclockwise a few turns until we get some flow out of here. I am unscrewing the petcock. We should get some flow here. And as you can see, nasty antifreeze is coming out of this. Looks like it's been contaminated with the wrong type of coolant. The Motorcraft Gold coolant getting mixed with green coolant, I take it. So once we get it draining, we can go ahead and go to the surge tank here. And just open it up and get some air flowing so that this can drain out faster. So we'll just give this some time here. So once the antifreeze is done draining out of the radiator, we can go ahead and screw the petcock back in and move the drain plug out of the way. It's probably advisable to jack the front end of the vehicle up in the air and support it securely with jack stands. You'd never want to get underneath a vehicle that's supported by just the jack alone. Okay, so the next step in the agenda, ignore the oil leaks. That's something else that's going to get addressed in the future here. Anyway, next on the agenda is to get the serpentine belt removed so that we can move the air conditioning pump away from the block a little bit so we can access the block plug. To do this, you'll need a 1/2-inch drive on the belt tensioner right here. There's a little square 1/2-inch hole right here, as you can see. I'm just going to use a breaker bar here, and we'll just pull the tensioner to release tension from the belt. Slowly walk the tensioner back. You don't want to let this snap back. You can hurt yourself and hurt other things here. So now that the belt is removed from the AC pump, we can go ahead and remove the 4 mounting bolts here. All right, I might have misspoken. So there's 3 bolts holding the AC compressor to the block. So I'm going to remove those here. They are 13 millimeter head and generally not terribly tight. So just go ahead and move stuff as necessary. Looks like I'm probably going to have to get a box end wrenched up here for that. Okay, so we got the hoses in the way here, the AC hoses. Hopefully you can see that in frame here. It won't really let the bolt out, but that's okay. The bolt is all the way out of the block. Go ahead and continue on to the remaining 2 bolts. Get that final bolt out. The compressor should be able to drop here. We can just let it hang, but I'm gonna go ahead and grab a bungee cord or something here to secure it kind of out of the way. Okay, I'm sorry about the camera work here, but this is the best view I can get you of the block plug. So it's right here. Here's the oil filter right here. This is the drain or the dipstick tube going into the oil pan. This leaky bit right here, which you probably can't see at the moment. There we go. This leaky bit right here is the oil pressure sending unit. So I'll probably have to order that. So the main focus is the block plug. This head here is a 14 millimeter head. Or possibly 9/16, but out of the Allen sockets that I have, the 14 seem to fit the best, as you can see right here. Okay, so this one was unusually tight. I still got the 14 mil in there. I finally got it to break torque. Well, like I said, this one is unusually tight. I can usually put my little compact Milwaukee on that and I usually pull it right off. Even my big dog right there couldn't do the job. So what I ended up doing is I put several extensions on and I got a breaker bar, as you can see here, and I even had to use a cheater pipe, not OSHA approved, on the end of the breaker bar here while holding up on here to keep that on there as square as possible, and finally got it to break torque. All right, so once you get it to break torque, you're gonna have to set the coolant drain pan here because as you all know, there's more coolant in the block that doesn't come out of the radiator. Here we go. I'm tired, so I'm gonna use the impact gun to pull the plug out. All right, there we go. Try to contain it as best as you can. This should take a couple minutes to drain out. But now the hard part's done. The part number for the block heater that we are using today is Cat's Heaters, company out of Minnesota, I believe. They experience cold weather, so this is all good stuff. I've had really good experiences with this brand. As you can see, I picked it up at our local Napa. And here's what the block heater looks like. So basically, just backwards of how we took that plug out, I'm going to go ahead and put some thread sealant on here, and then we'll just thread it back into the block. Okay, as you might be able to see here, I've got some sealant, pipe thread sealant on the new block heater, and I'm just going to thread it into the block. So hopefully things just go smoothly from here. So we always start it by hand. You do not want to cross thread this block. You will be in a world of hurt if you cross thread this and screw up the threads here. So just go by hand, take your time. You'll eventually get to the point where you can feel it go in, just like so, just as you saw me do. It goes in a good part of the way by hand. This particular block heater uses a 1 1/8 size socket. So I'm gonna go ahead and snug it the rest of the way with the socket. And I'm using a non-impact style socket for a reason, because it just barely sneaks past the oil cooler, or I should say the oil filter housing, and the dipstick tube. So we're just gonna go till it gets snug. It really doesn't need to be all that tight. They're pipe threads, so they're a tapered thread. So I'm gonna go ahead and move you out of the way so that I can get under here properly and feel for torque. But yeah, that just snug. All right, you should feel it just stop. Okay, so once you have the block heater installed and torqued down in the block, the next step is to put the plug in. So you just want to orient this plug so that it's out of the way of the oil filter, and try to keep it out of the exhaust. So in this case, I think this orientation is going to be the best bet. We want to get this cord installed now, so that we can put the air compressor back on and start reassembly of the vehicle here. So go ahead and do that. So the connection just pushes on initially, and then this nut here just keeps it from unplugging itself. So I'll just go ahead and thread this on. Tight fit, so we're using a small pair of these Knipex pliers, or Knipex, however you pronounce it. Very handy. I like that these are relatively small, but the jaw capacity is still quite large. If you don't already have a set of these, I would highly recommend getting some. This does not have to be on Gorilla Tight or anything. All it does is it just holds this electrical plug in place. I think we're right about there. All right, so what I'll do is I will get a tie wrap and attempt to tie wrap these cords here out of the way of the exhaust and out of the way of anything else. So I will have to replace this here in the very near future, but for video purposes, I'm going to go ahead and zip tie these or tie wrap these right about here. That's a good spot. So as you can see here, I've got the cord zip tied out of the way, or tie wrapped out of the way. You want to make sure it's out of the way of the exhaust, which is right here. You don't want this cable burning up. So for now, I've just got it out the top of the engine compartment. We'll do final routing here after we get everything buttoned up. So reverse of installation, or reverse of removal that is, we'll put the air compressor back in place, and we'll just start reassembling. The hard part is done. Move this heavy compressor back in place. Get the lower bolts more or less aligned into the block here. If you have a friend to help, that's even better. I don't have a friend here, so I just have to struggle with it for a second. Just want to make sure you're not stripping it in the block. I'm not using any real torque, so as you can see, it's going in pretty nicely. All right, I'm gonna try to get the second bolt lined up. Hopefully the camera's still in a good spot. Again, started by hand. That's close for that. Try to get this third bolt jiggled in place with the bottom two on first. That makes the third one way easier to install and feels like it's going in just fine. But now that we got everything started, we can go ahead and just do an initial tightening of these guys here. We want to tighten these to spec, all three of them, and once we are done doing that, we could put the belt back on. Our viewpoint is still from the passenger wheel. My finger is pointing towards the front of the engine, or front of the engine compartment, that is, front bumper. We're gonna go ahead and put our tool back on the tensioner here, relieve tension so that we can pull the belt back on. All right, we wanna make sure that the belt is in the grooves of all the pulleys. The reason why I mention that is because up top here, I think this is the power steering pump. It's not quite on. So this is where a friend can be very handy. So I'm gonna go ahead and go on the top side here and try to get that belt aligned. Okay, so I don't know how well you can see, but that belt's horribly misaligned. I'm gonna, since I'm by myself here, I'm gonna attempt to push on the breaker bar down below with my foot and see if I can just get enough slack here to put it over the power steering pump. So I've got a little bit of tension on that with my foot. I can't really see it too well because the light's terrible, but we got it on the power steering pulley here correctly. We will release tension slowly on the tensioner. We'll go back down on the bottom and just ensure that the rest of the pulleys still have the belt on properly. Hopefully I'm not too shaky here. The crank pulley, we got the belt around the crank pulley properly. It's engaged, belt centered. Same with the AC pulley up to the power steering pump, to the tensioner pulley, finally to the alternator. The belt is on properly. So that concludes that part. Now we'll work on putting the splash shield back on. We want to make sure the drain petcock is tight. It's a plastic petcock, so basically just a little more than finger tight and it's good. And from there we'll lower the vehicle and start filling up with coolant. So now that we have the bottom half of the car buttoned up, the radiator petcock tightened up, remember that's only plastic, so it's just a little bit more than hand tight and you're good to go there. It doesn't need to be on super snug. You'll end up stripping it or breaking that radiator petcock off. So now that we've got that done, the next step is to start filling the cooling system on this vehicle. Most of these escapes take the Zerex G05 coolant, which is yellow in color. The Ford Motorcraft coolant is called the Motorcraft Gold, which is more gold in color, or more pea colored as I like to think of it, or urine. Some of these early escapes came with green coolant in it, the Motorcraft Green. There was a TSB out many years ago saying that you could flush out the system and replace it with the Motorcraft Gold coolant with no problems. So I went ahead and did that. Got this system flushed out with distilled water, ran it and drained it. So hopefully I've got all that green stuff out. It's not a big deal if you mix a little bit of the green with the yellow or the gold. They're pretty compatible. It's just, it makes for an ugly color. So without delaying any further, the process that I like to do with these V6s anyway is to go to the surge tank or the degas bottle, whatever you want to call it, and remove the larger hose up here. We'll remove the hose and then we'll stick a funnel in it and start filling that way. So we'll go ahead and do that now. You will need at least 2 gallons of the 50-50 mix, or in this case I mixed it myself with distilled water. It's cheaper to buy it in pure form and buy a gallon of distilled water from the grocery store and mix it this way. So I am going to start filling from this other hose. Hopefully I'm in frame here, barely. So So we want to take our time filling. We don't want to have too many air bubbles just burp up and splash us in the face with this coolant. The reason why I do it this way is it seems to reduce the amount of time that it takes to burp the system out. The 3.0s here don't have any sort of bleed valve, and yeah, it's sort of just a pain to bleed these compared to the 4-cylinder models, I think. But anyway, this is what I do. I start filling from this hose here until it just won't take anymore. As you can see here, it's still kind of just trying to burp. It does help to squeeze the radiator hoses. So I'll put a little bit more in this funnel now that we're closer to full on this. And I'll just show you what I'm doing here. So down below, I'm just squeezing on this upper radiator hose. Just slowly squeezing on it, I guess, and just letting the air bubbles come out of this hose that we're filling from. So what this is doing is it's filling the radiator itself as well as this upper radiator hose. And like I said, it speeds up the process for burping the vehicle, burping the cooling system of the vehicle. Probably different than some of the other guys out here in YouTube land, but this is just one method that I've found that seems to work fairly well for me, so I just continue to do it. Okay, so we're starting to get to the point now where fluid's no longer going down the hose, as you can probably see here. I'll go ahead and reattach it to the surge tank or the degas bottle. And you might notice here, maybe, that the coolant level is starting to come up in the bottom of the tank. So we want to go about an inch above the cold mark. The top of the cold mark is right about where the seam is. It's really hard to read here, but this is the top of the cold mark. We want to go to about an inch over that. Sometimes you can actually fill that way from this hose. So we'll go ahead and try that for a little bit here. See if we can push some of that fluid into the surge tank. It sometimes happens, sometimes not. We've already got the hose out and disconnected, so it's worth a shot. So the level is coming up in that tank. And as I squeeze the upper radiator hose, that level has come back down. So we'll just keep going, filling this up. This hose here has burped itself again. So the more time you take here, the less time it'll take you later to get the system purged. And just keep doing this process until things start to settle out, where this will no longer take any more fluid and the level in the tank is approximately an inch or so above the cold mark. And the level has come all the way down in the surge tank, so I'm just going to keep going. It's a good sign when that happens. That means we're getting more air bubbles out. So we'll continue to do this. We'll give it a little bit more in this hose, and then we'll put it back onto the tank and secure it. We have used about a gallon so far. Be sure to clean the coolant off of the vehicle when you're done. This is not good on the paintwork. We're at the max mark. This hose does not appear to be taking any more fluid. Squeeze that upper radiator hose just a little bit more. Okay, we got a couple more bubbles out. We'll put this hose back on. Okay, so there should be a little white mark. I don't know if you can see that. That white lines up with this little protrusion on the tank. All right. Just trying to get the clamp lined up with the original marks. It's a good idea if you're reusing a hose like this to just keep the clamp lined up with its original marks as best as you can. Okay, so we'll continue filling till we're about an inch above the cold line. We'll just let things settle. You can squeeze this upper radiator hose. Squeeze it rapidly, 20, 30 times maybe. All right. So from there, we'll put the radiator cap on, or the surge tank. It's not really a radiator cap, being that it's a closed system and the tank is pressurized. So we'll go ahead and put this cap back on. Okay, so we are in the cab of the vehicle. I'm going to start the engine up. It's cold, so we'll just go ahead and let it idle for, about a minute. Now remember, the cap is on the coolant reservoir or surge tank or degas bottle, whatever you want to call it. They're all pretty much the same thing. So we'll let this thing run for about a minute. Oh, there we go. That should help a little bit. Let it run a minute so that it gets the oil circulating through the block before we end up revving it. It's not good to rev up a completely stone cold engine. So we've got a few more seconds here. After we hit the minute mark or so of idling, we'll run it up to 3,500 RPM and hold that there steady as we can for 30 to 45 seconds. So what this does is it gets the water pump circulating. Now if I could just hold it steady, my foot's twitching. It gets the water pump circulating, and it's forcing air bubbles into different parts of the system. So, that's about 45 seconds. I wasn't really paying attention. So now that we've done that, we'll let it idle for about 30 seconds again, and then we'll just shut it off. All right, I think that's about 25-30 seconds. Get the idea. So we'll shut it off and we'll go back to the engine compartment. So now that we have let that engine idle for 30 seconds, we're gonna go to the surge tank here and just check the fluid level. As you can see, it's still about an inch above the cold mark. So what I'll do is, the engine's cold. You never want to take this cap off. The engine's still cold, so we'll go ahead and take this cap off and let the fluid level settle. And if you want to squeeze that upper radiator hose while you're waiting, that's fine too. The idea here is we just want to get any air that might have burped out with that first go around. Get that air burped out of there and top off the fluid as necessary. So it's looking like it's settled fairly well. We'll proceed with the next step, which is basically to just let it idle until the engine's warmed up. I will note that we will be idling the engine with the cap off. We'll be idling it until the vehicle warms up and gets to operating temperature, which is indicated by the coolant temperature gauge sitting right around the middle of the range. So I've gotten back into the vehicle. We're just letting it idle here. As you can see here, the coolant gauge is starting to rise, indicating that the engine is warming up. Here in a little bit, I'm going to turn the heater on. I usually like to put it on the panel vent so I can feel it, but I don't want air rushing into the camera, so I'll put on floor vents for right now. And we'll just monitor the heat output. If the heat output is weak at idle with the engine fully warmed up, then that's an indication that there's still air pockets left in the system. And while we're doing this, you might want to periodically check that coolant tank to make sure the level hasn't dropped. Again, we're doing it with the cap off. This might be different than some of the other guys out there on YouTube land, but this is just what works best for me. All right, so we're about warmed up right now. I don't have my scan tool plugged into it at the moment, but when that needle reaches approximately the halfway point, that's an indication that the engine is pretty close to operating temperature. So what we'll do now is we'll rev the engine up to 3,500 RPMs and hold it there for 30 seconds and then drop back down to idle for another 30 seconds. And so if you have an assistant, have the assistant keep an eye on the coolant in the coolant bottle. If you're doing it by yourself, then you might just want to get out during the 30-second idle period and just keep an eye on that coolant level. You don't want that coolant level dropping too low. You always want to keep it at least into the cold range. So here we go. So we'll let it settle for 30 seconds. I'm getting extremely hot heat out of the dash now, even here at an idle. So it's an indication that we're pretty close to purged here. So go ahead and let it idle. I'm going to go check the coolant level real quick. Okay, we are still above the cold mark here, so that's good. I'm going to go ahead and put that cap back on, and we'll just repeat that process. Since I'm getting good heat, I'll put that cap back on. All right. And we'll repeat that process with a 30-second rev. We'll let it idle again. I've got the heat on setting number 1. And I've just kind of got my hand over the vent, and man, it is hot. I think the owner is going to be very pleased here with the coolant flush that I did. So, something I will note, I got heat right away. So if I was not getting heat, I would keep that cap off and keep doing this 30-second rev cycle, 30-second idle, and just keep doing that. Keep monitoring the air, monitoring the coolant level in the expansion tank, and add fluid as necessary. And just keep doing that. But once I start getting heat, it's okay to put the cap on. It's okay to put the cap back on and do another 30-second rev cycle, and just 30-second rev, 30-second idle, 30-second rev. And when you get to the point where it's pushing out very hot heat at idle, you know you've got most of the air bubbles out. And right now I'm feeling extremely confident with this. This one burped out a little faster than normal, so I'm pretty pleased with that. The customer will be able to get her vehicle back here soon. All right, so I've shut the vehicle off. We're just going to let it sit. We're going to let it rest. As you might notice here, the coolant level is still above the cold mark. I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that level. as this vehicle cycles, it has heat cycles, you know, it gets driven, cools down overnight, gets driven again, it'll burp a little bit more. You get tiny little air bubbles out of it. So it's a good idea to just keep it a little bit overfilled. Maybe that's a little more than I normally go, but that's okay. I know the owner, so we will monitor this for the next few days, and if that fluid level drops down a little bit, we'll just continue filling it to the top of the cold range, which is that seam. We'll keep filling it to the top of that cold range until it levels out. It could take a couple of days to do this. It's wintertime here in Alaska, so things tend to happen faster when the heat cycles are more extreme. So it's pretty cold out. This engine won't take very long to cool down fully, and air bubbles can burp out here. Again, just keep monitoring that fluid for the next few days, next few dry cycles. Keep a jug of the antifreeze with you in a funnel, and keep her topped off. Now remember, do not ever open that cap when the engine's hot. If you touch that upper radiator hose and it's hot, don't open that cap. You can burn yourself. So only top it off, only take that cap off when things have cooled down. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope it was helpful for you guys. If you like the video, please click on that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel so you can see more content like this. I hope you guys are having a good day, and we will see you next time. Thanks.